Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Khosla on F1, the hopefully weekly podcast that I'll be doing hopefully throughout the entirety of the 2017 Formula One season. It has been a while, and I'm very sorry that I did stop doing these during 2016, but I decided to change some things in the show. It's very much a similar format to what I was doing before, but hopefully these will be shorter shows. And also there'll be a bit more editing put into it and a bit more time put into them than what I was doing before, which was a very rushed job to sort of try and get things out on time. Overall, it's been an exciting off season to say the least. We did just finish with preseason testing in Barcelona, 8 days of that. So we'll go over that today, and we'll also go over what we see in the cars. We'll take a look at the new cars that launched. We will take a look at how they did through the preseason test and what we think the pecking order is going to be come Melbourne in a couple weeks' time. Now, it's very exciting time to be a Formula One fan. You know, we've just had 3 years of Mercedes-Benz dominance. And, you know, I think a lot of people are really hoping that this could be the season that ends it. And based on testing, it could very well be. So I guess without further ado, let's jump straight into it. And Ferrari, I mean, they were the big headliners of testing, who they sort of came into testing very quietly, launched their car a couple days before, and were immediately on the pace. They were immediately very fast, and by the end of it, Kimi Räikkönen posted the fastest lap time of 1:18.634, which, first of all, is an insane lap time. The pole time last year for Lewis Hamilton at the Spanish Grand Prix was a 1:22 flat. So this is around 3.3 seconds faster of a lap time that these new 2017 cars are doing, which is pretty crazy because I think from what I've seen, the engines are pretty much the same. It's more so the aero that's changed and the mechanical grip that's changed. And so these cars are going to be pushing some crazy fast lap times, and I'm pretty sure Kimi Räikkönen's lap was with him lifting off pretty seriously in the final sector. So that just gives you a decent indication of what these cars are going to be capable of, once we get to qualifying and once the drivers are really pushing them to do fast laps. And I think we're going to see some lap records fall this year in the races. We came very close on some occasions last season, but I think this might be the year that they do. We're looking at early 2000s level pace, and it's looking very impressive, and the cars are looking very good as well. But testing isn't only about lap times. It's mostly about mileage and understanding the car as much as possible, because you don't know what fuel load people are running. You don't know what ballast they're running or what setting their engine is on, whether they're running at full blast. So mileage is really the big thing in testing, and I mean, to no surprise really to anyone, Mercedes was at the top. Over 5,000 kilometers covered. Ferrari not too far behind with 4,400 kilometers. But, I mean, that's a pretty insane mileage. And I believe, I'm not sure about Mercedes, but I do know Williams completed the entire 8 days of testing, or 7 days for Williams, with Stroll bidding the car at the end of the first test. 7 days of testing with just one engine. So that's pretty crazy. That says something, I think, about the reliability of the Mercedes power unit. And I think that's going to be a very strong unit come the season. And that could very well be what makes the difference between the Ferrari and the Mercedes. Because the Ferrari has looked fairly reliable as well, don't get me wrong. But the Mercedes has looked completely bulletproof. I don't think there have been really any stoppages for them during the entirety of testing, which is, I mean, unheard of, especially with these extremely complex power units that they have in the back of these cars. I mean, looking team by team, I guess Ferrari is really the best place to start. And like I said, they look really, really strong. And again, no one really knows where anyone's going to be come Melbourne. But I think Ferrari's going to be up there. Even Lewis Hamilton seems to think Ferrari is up there, which is saying something when a three-time world champion and one of the most successful drivers, I mean, of all time at this point, is saying that Ferrari looks to be the team to beat. There's definitely some confidence that he lacks in the car then, and it's not unheard of to have Lewis Hamilton complaining about the Mercedes car, but also I think he's typically been a bit more optimistic at this point in the season, before the season's even began, really, in previous years. So take it how you will. It could very well just be them talking to the press and sort of building up Ferrari when they actually have a stronger car. We don't really know. And that's a little bit unfortunate because, it would be great to sort of go into Melbourne sort of thinking, okay, this is where everyone's going to be, but it also leaves that bit of mystery that keeps things really exciting and interesting heading into the first round of the season. The Ferrari, yeah, it looks fast, but some people have noticed if you take a look at it on track, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to get a video, but if I do, that would go here. But if I'm not, the car doesn't look super stable around the track. I think especially in high-speed corners it was. And that could definitely be a problem. So the car is fast, but doesn't seem to have the same front-end grip that something like the Mercedes might have. So I'm sure that's being worked on at Maranello right now. And I'm sure they'll have some kind of new wing ready for Melbourne. But from what it seems, the car is not very stable in the front end. But also you have drivers like Kimi Räikkönen setting the fastest lap of the session of all 8 days, who's a driver who really does enjoy a stable front end. So take it how you will. Again, it's very difficult to tell how exactly teams will do. But moving on to Mercedes, I sort of covered it. They have a very strong overall package, but they don't seem to have that clear advantage over the rest of the field that they have had in the past. I think previously Mercedes, if you remember last year, they came to the test with only medium tires because they were so confident that they'd be ahead of everyone else. That they didn't really even bother doing fast runs. They just focused on tire wear and race pace and race simulations. And we didn't really see that Mercedes come into this year. So they have, I think, less confidence than they have had in previous years. But also, I have a feeling that there's still something that they're hiding. They did lose Paddy Lowe, but they have now got James Allison on board, who will, I'm sure, be helping with the development of this car, even though it isn't completely his design. But I think Mercedes looks very strong all around and could still very well be that top team that teams strive to be again this season. Red Bull is a big question mark. These top three, I think, the order that they're going to be in come Melbourne is definitely a question mark. I don't think anyone really has much certainty as to how that'll be, because Red Bull launched the car with a very basic design, and I think everyone thought, okay, that's the Red Bull thing. So they're going to launch the car that looks very basic and show up to the first test with this crazy intricate car, but they didn't. The car that they launched was pretty much the car that we saw on track. It was a very simple, very streamlined design, and that could either talk about the lack of effectiveness of the Renault power unit that they have in the back, and Adrian Newey might not think that there's enough power there to really put on a load of downforce. So it could very well be that the team is like, okay, we're not getting much power from this power unit, so let's try and make the car as streamlined as possible. So it could be a new design philosophy. Or Newey had said in an interview that the idea was to get the fundamental balance of the chassis and the very basics of the car to be very sound and to work perfectly together before adding on aero appendages. And it could very well be that we come to Melbourne and that car could look completely different than the car we saw in testing. It could be a completely different car. So it's very likely that they could be hiding something. Ricciardo and Verstappen, if the team is hiding something, I don't know if they're in on it or if they're telling the press that they're not, because they don't seem to think the car is going to be ready to be competitive until around Spain. So again, it's very difficult to judge pace, but what we can judge is what we know about the teams from the past. And I mean, Adrian Newey is, at least in my personal eye, and I think a lot of people's, the top designer in the sport currently, and maybe even of all time. So it's very unlikely for him to have just made a very basic car that's not going to be that aero efficient. So I think aerodynamically, I think that car is still going to be one of the best out there. It's going to be how they deal with that Renault power unit in the back. That's going to really be the deciding factor of how they perform. Williams was actually very strong. The first week was a little rough. I'll give them. I'll say that Lance Stroll got his first runs in that F1 car, and he wasn't super confident. He had some spins, had some crashes. But then come the second test, it was a completely different driver, it was a completely different team. The team was running most laps on some days. Massa topped the second day of testing in the second test. And all around, it looks like a very strong package. And, I'm looking forward to seeing what Williams can do. And I don't think they're going to be in the same elite level as the top three teams, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull, but I think they're going to be knocking on that door, and I think they're going to be able to get away with a couple podiums here and there throughout the season. And, this might be exactly what they need. Williams might be sort of on the comeback. Massa, Rob Smedley had said that these are the types of car that Felipe Massa loves, cars that he can really push into a corner, and it's similar to the cars we had in 2008, and Felipe Massa nearly won that championship in 2008. So, take it how you will. Williams does look very strong, though. It looks like they finally solved their sort of chassis weakness, as they do seem to have a strong chassis, which is a great step forward for the team. Toro Rosso was actually very interesting. The car, if you look at it, and there was a very interesting picture online that I'll try and find and post here. The Toro Rosso looks nearly identical to the Mercedes, so it's very interesting that the two teams were able to come out into preseason testing with almost the exact same design, which is, I think it's very interesting to see that two teams come out, read the regulations in the exact same way. It looks the same, but doesn't seem to be performing the same, and I think that could very well be down to the Renault power unit in the back. Carlos Sainz still posted a very competitive time of a 119.837, which is, not bad at all. That's knocking on the door of Red Bull pace, just a couple tenths behind his former teammate Max Verstappen. And if that Renault engine is not to the pace of Mercedes or Ferrari, that chassis could very well be as good as the chassis that Mercedes has. It could very well be as good as the chassis that Red Bull has. They again, it's difficult to say who has the best at anything, really, but Toro Rosso looks very strong, bar the power unit area of the car. I think if Renault is able to sort out those little niggles that they have with the power unit, Toro Rosso could really be a force to be reckoned with this season. If you ask me, you can take a look at it. It's definitely the best looking car on the grid. And, from there we move from the best looking car to in my eyes, the worst looking car on the grid, the Force India. Not a very pretty car at all, really, if I'm being honest. But they were very quiet throughout testing, and I think they do have some quiet confidence. Esteban Ocon looked very strong behind the wheel. Let me see where he was lap time wise. So they ran 120.1, both drivers, Perez and Ocon. And so they look to be around 5th or 6th, I want to say. I think they're going to be battling with Williams, Toro Rosso. It's going to be Williams, Toro Rosso, and Force India. I think are going to be that sort of midfield, the top end of the midfield. And I'll go over that pecking order later on. But, the design that they have seems to get the job done, which is the most important thing. There are some rumors, though, that the car is actually overweight, and they're going to be working on trying to fix that come Melbourne. I'm not really sure if those rumors are true. The car doesn't have, obviously, the pace of the top runners, and it does seem to have fallen off a little bit of, I think, the 4th place finishing car that we saw it was last year. But, quiet testing from Force India, and I'm very interested to see what they're able to come up with come Melbourne. Renault, meanwhile, sort of a very transformed team. This is their first car since 2011, I believe. The first Renault F1 car since 2011 or so. It looks like a good car. The chassis actually looks pretty sound, and it doesn't look too fidgety. It actually looks pretty stable. The only issue they seem to be having is with the power unit that they have behind them. And we've seen that from all the Renault-powered cars. They don't seem to have the best reliability, and I assume that means they haven't been really running their cars at full crack, so you haven't been able to see any of them really pushing their speeds. And I wish I had a a chart which had the speed trap times. I'm not really sure if they were measured, but I'm curious to see actually where the Renault sat on the speed trap, because that'll give us a decent indication of where they are with their engine performance compared to the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes. Meanwhile, Haas, this is also their first proper F1 car. You could very easily argue that their car last year wasn't really theirs. They had Dallara really designed the chassis, designed the tub, I believe it was, and they really didn't do much R&D on the car, so the car was very much a store-bought F1 car, effectively. And so this year is really their first now attempt at building their own F1 car, and it looks pretty good. They've I think it's another team that's been fairly quiet through testing. They still have had some struggles with brakes, so that's an issue that's carried over from last year. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. They have, I think, come out and said they're looking at other brake suppliers or working with Brembo to solve the brake issue. But as of right now, that seems to be the real weakness of the car. Other than that, it looks like a very strong overall package. And, switching gears from that to probably what in my eyes looks like the weakest package, McLaren Honda. And this is tough for me to say as personally a big McLaren fan. They've had horrible reliability through this testing. I think their longest consecutive run of laps was 11 laps around the Catalunya circuit. So that's a sixth of a race distance is what they were able to complete in one run, which is not good at all. It's looking like 2015 again for those guys, and which is a shame because I think it looks like they might have had a strong chassis, especially when they launched. It's a very interesting design, but there's nothing coming from that Honda power unit. It's I believe Sky Sports actually came out today and said it was vibrations that was preventing them from really getting proper runs, and that was affecting reliability. So I'm curious to see if they can get that fixed before Melbourne, or if Melbourne's going to be another extended test session, something we've heard all too much in the McLaren Honda camp in the past 2 years. For me personally, I want to see these guys back up at the top. They've got the two of the best drivers on the grid, Fernando Alonso, Stoffel Van Dorn. And, it's unfortunate that they have to run around in this car at the back of the grid. And I think what might be all the way at the very back of the grid is going to be Sauber. Between Sauber and McLaren, and again, I'll go through the pecking order afterwards. But Sauber has had good reliability. They've had, I believe they had the fourth most laps of any team, with 788 laps, 3,600 kilometers covered during testing. And I think that's all down to their 2016 power unit behind both Marcus Ericsson and Pascal Wehrlein, and also Antonio Giovinazzi in the first test, but also not a lot of pace to go with it. So they do have the reliability, which is great for them and should hopefully see them score some points in these first few races with teams who don't really have that reliability. But also, the chassis doesn't look as good as anyone else, really. And I think that's what we all expected. It was going to be a weak chassis. But, they have funding now, and I think they're probably going to start focus already on their 2018 car very early on in their campaign in order to really get a head start there and hopefully be back in the midfield so that we don't really have any back markers by 2018. Looking at what I think the pecking order might be, I'm still going to go out there and say Mercedes is going to be the top team. I think it could very well be a toss-up between the top three teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. But I think Mercedes still has the edge, even if it is now a very slight edge over the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull. And, there's also the fact that Ferrari doesn't have the best strategic team this season, or at least from last season, so we don't really know what's changed there. Mercedes, I think, will have the pace, they have the strategy, they have the World Championship winning mentality, something that Ferrari hasn't had for the past 9 years, as crazy as it is to think that. But they do still have a lot of promise. They have a good-looking car, and now I think the team needs to get together and really make that entire operation work. Red Bull could very well be up there as well. Didn't look so in testing, but again, this is Adrian Newey we're talking about, and this is a man who always has an idea on how to improve and then continuously improve the cars he builds and really build some very strong race cars in the past. So those are sort of the top three, and I think they're going to be in a separate league almost. So I've separated the grid into four different chunks, I guess. So you have those three up top, followed by the trio of Williams, Force India, and Toro Rosso. Williams, I think, will have the edge of these three, but I think Force India and Toro Rosso could be battling it out. I think Toro Rosso has the stronger chassis, but Force India has the stronger power unit. So it'll be interesting to see how that balances out. And if, the Renault power unit does gain power, because we have lost a token system this season, if that Renault gets better and better as the season goes on, I think Toro Rosso could very well be challenging even Williams to be the fourth best team on the grid. Behind them is sort of the back end of the midfield, teams, and I have there Renault and Haas. Renault has definitely made a step forward, but also with that power unit and not necessarily the best chassis on the grid, I don't think they're going to be performing any miracles this season. I'd be very happy to see Nico Hülkenberg get himself a podium finally, but I don't think it's going to happen this season. If it is going to happen, it's going to be next season or the year after that. And I think Renault said that when they first launched in 2016, is that the plan was to get the car up and running, I think around 2018 or 2019, to get the proper team fully organized and back to race winning times when they were in the Fernando Alonso era. And with them is Haas F1, who I think will still be able to score some points this season. I think they'll still struggle. They'll still be a back end of the midfield team, but I mean, they are still a second-year team. And then behind those guys, in what I'd put as the bottom tier, I have Sauber and McLaren. And what makes me even a bit sadder is I have Sauber ahead of McLaren. They don't have pace, but they have so much more reliability than that Honda engine does. And I'm honestly curious to see how long it'll take McLaren to say, just give us the engine we had in 2016 until you guys fix this engine for 2017, because it's not there. There's maybe if they, in theory it'll have performance, but if it doesn't have the reliability, there's no point in running it. That's how it is in my eyes. So it's very sad to see McLaren looking to be the bottom team, the back markers of this season, but it's an unfortunate saga that's been the McLaren saga story these past few seasons, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope Honda's able to fix their problems come Melbourne, and the team's actually able to turn things up and be in the upper midfield. But it's not looking that way, especially not at the beginning of the season. With that is pretty much the end of the show, and I hope I kept it short. I don't have an exact time on how long this has been, so I'm going to hope it's been pretty short, but if it has been a little bit longer, I do apologize. I'm going to try and keep these to be around 20 minutes now, as I think that's just going to be easier. And beyond that, I think we have a very interesting season coming up, and I look forward to hopefully covering it every single week. Like I said, I'll be planning on doing things every Sunday coming up this season. This is recorded on a Saturday, I know. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I really hope I can keep doing this, and please, I appreciate any feedback that you guys have for me to improve the show, as that's what it's all about. And hopefully you guys like this slightly different format. I've got more editing going on here, so we'll see how things pan out. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you hopefully next week. Thanks.